Welcome to the Gentleman Project podcast. I'm Cory Moore.
And I'm Kirk Chugg. Today we have pathologically positive Dr. Paul Jenkins on the podcast. He is an expert on teaching people how to live on purpose. He studies and teaches the art and science of being constructive in a sometimes destructive environment. This guy is well known throughout the space in podcasting, YouTubing, in individual coaching and psychology. We are so happy to have Dr. Paul on the podcast this morning. He's joining us remotely from his home, but we couldn't be more happy to have Dr. Paul on the podcast and glean some information on the things that he teaches. This man is a wealth of knowledge and just a pool of experience that we get to draw from today. So welcome, Dr. Paul Jenkins, to the podcast this morning.
Thank you. Kirk, you just keep talking. I mean, I'm feeling better the longer I listen to you.
Well, I'm all about making you feel positive about yourself, right? This is what you are known for, is this power of positivity. And I love how you've used a negative connotation word like pathologically in the title of your book, to be pathologically positive. Explain to us a little bit about where that came from and why that's so important in the things that you teach and coach other people.
Well, and thank you for asking about that, because the word pathological in the industry of psychology means disordered, disconnected from reality, crazy. And it sounds a little crazy to suggest that you can be positive no matter what. And I'm not talking about the trite, fluffy, just think positive that you hear from motivational speakers or sometimes podcasters or gurus on the stage. I'm talking about the science behind how to operate the equipment of your own mind. And when you understand the psychological principles that are behind it, I've been accused of being pathologically positive. And so I just embraced that as the title of my book. And we call it Pathological Positivity.
It's a great cover. It's a great name for the book. When did that come out?
Let's see. We published that in 2014, I believe it was. So it was pre-pandemic and all of the fun stuff that has disrupted people's lives. I mean, you've probably noticed this. Stuff happens. I think there's even a bumper sticker that says something along those lines, right? Stuff happens, and our circumstances in life can sometimes tip us over. Just before I wrote the book, I was going through some of my own stuff. In fact, chapter 1 is titled Lightning Strikes. And you know how you're going along through life and then some thunderous bolt of lightning just tips you over. And it could be a pandemic, or it could be an economic situation. For me, it was a bankruptcy. And it just totally disrupts whatever you thought was supposed to happen for your life. I mean, I've interviewed a lot of people over the course of my career. How many folks actually have life happen exactly as they envisioned it?
I would say zero.
Yeah, very few.
Right about there, Cory?
Yeah.
Probably that's true. Because, in fact, another title of one of my chapters is Surprise. Because you go through, you're expecting life to go this way, and then surprise, it goes this way instead. Those experiences, combined with my knowledge of clinical psychology, I'm a trained, licensed clinical psychologist, but it's my life that has taught me how those principles actually apply. When the rubber meets the road, what is it that this means for, I like to ask, therefore what? We get all the philosophy and all of the principles floating around, but then we ask, therefore what? How does this apply? How does this walk around in my two shoes? And that's where things get really exciting, because life is not going to happen exactly how you envisioned it. You'll have surprises. Stuff happens. And that doesn't matter. Because regardless of what happens, there are principles around how to operate the equipment of our own mind that allow us to choose positivity the way I've defined it. Regardless of what happens in our life, we get to choose a position relative to that in two things that our brain is doing. And I can explain more of that to you if that's the direction we go today, but you can tell I get excited about this stuff.
No, I think it's fascinating. One, I've had a question I wanted to ask you, like, and this may be, like a bit of a vulnerable question, but like, what's your positivity conversion story? You weren't always this way. So what took you from the person that you were into the person that now teaches this to other people? And what was it? What was the switch that was flipped that you said, oh, now this works? And that might be actually the answer, might be where you were going with this.
My job is to illuminate the obvious. This is cool. I get paid to tell people things they already know. But there's obvious things that are completely unnoticed until they're called to our attention. Obvious, but unnoticed. So go there for a minute. Your shirt, can you feel it? Now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now you can. Now that I call it to your attention, it was unnoticed until I mentioned it. Or the fact that we're speaking English. Did you notice? Again, obvious, but you don't notice it until it's called to your attention. Yeah. And many of our mental processes are in that space. I'm no different. Just because I'm a professional psychologist does not mean that I'm immune to those same principles that drive everyone's brain. So when we were talking about my book just now in chapter 1, Lightning Strikes, I had a busy outpatient psychotherapy practice. I was working mostly with children, parents. Okay, this is my training. My career started in child, adolescent, and family psychology. Busy practice. I had a 5-month waiting period. I was booked solid for 5 months. You couldn't even get an appointment with me. And I had negative cash flow for 2 quarters in a row. Okay, I don't know how you guys do your math, but that's not sustainable, right? And it landed me in this place of bankruptcy, which I thought was the economy's fault. It was my business partner's fault. It was all these circumstances in my life that had somehow combined against me in this perfect storm, and it's not my fault, and I'm a poor victim. And I told you I started my podcast in 2007, which is before podcasting was even a thing. I think we were talking about that before the show. And one of my guests at about the time I was going through this podcast was Mary Louise Zeller. And she is so cool. She's 80 this year and a 6th-degree black belt in Taekwondo. This grandma can kick you the next Wednesday. Okay. And I'm interviewing Mary Louise on my show. At this point, she was in her 70s when I interviewed her. And she was at the time a 4-time world champion in this sport, 18 national titles. She took 4th at the Sydney Olympics in her 50s. Okay, just wrap your head around that. And I'm interviewing this inspiring lady, and she knows a little bit about what's going on with me. And she leans up to her mic and she says, "Paul, the troops aren't coming." And she paused to let that sink in, and then she said, "We are the troops." And she might as well have kicked me. I'm glad she didn't, because that would have really hurt. But figuratively, she did kick me in the butt that day to see something. And the thing that is obvious to me now, but that it was unnoticed at the time, was that I was trapped in victim thinking, See, and this is what it illuminated to me. I don't have to change a thing. I need to change a think. That was the illumination. It was like, oh, see, until she said that to me, I didn't see myself as being what I call now a victim paradigm, being in a victim paradigm. And I'm not talking about a victim of crime or a victim of abuse. I'm talking about a victim way of seeing things. I didn't even see it. And until you see it as a choice, it's not. Until you see it as a choice, it's not. Because you're going to roll with whatever your programming is. All right? You don't even notice it. The programming, like English, okay? I pointed out earlier, we're speaking English, and you're like, well, yeah, right? It's obvious, but unnoticed. We were programmed to speak English by people who didn't give us a choice. And I look at what you guys are doing with the Gentleman Project. Okay, we are programming the next generation. And we're not giving them a choice either. Right?
Right.
And I'm not saying that it's bad. I mean, English is a very useful language, but it's not the only language. It's not the best language. It's just a language that we were programmed to speak by people who didn't give us a choice. And the same thing happens with our paradigm. And I didn't realize that some of my programming through, whether it's parents or society or culture or language or whatever it is, some of my programming had me stuck in a position of victim mentality that I didn't even see until Mary Louise Zeller pointed it out to me. And once I saw it, see, once you see it, now you step back into choice. And that's huge, okay? You want to teach your kids that happiness is a choice? Well, until they see how it's a choice, it's not. And then we just default to our programming. So I may have got away from the question you actually asked me.
No, I don't think you did. I think it was right on.
Yeah, I would just back up what you're saying. I see the habit that people have created, whether it's given to them or, they inherited it, or whether they just have been conditioned into these habits of being a victim, or I see a lot of people who just see the negative in things versus the positive in things, all those kind of things. Yeah. So I guess the follow-up to that, and I try to teach my kids, right? I try to show them, hey, there's two ways to look at this, right? Couple follow-ups to what you just said. Number one is, how do you create that paradigm shift for people, right? Or what have you seen successful in giving people that aha moment that, oh, I can see the world different and I can behave differently, and it is a choice, as I call it. And number two, are there some best practices related to the how behind getting out of your old habits, getting out of what you've been taught?
Both of those questions are huge and significant in my mind. And maybe if we take the second one first, okay, the how part, what we are asking people to do, whether it's our kids or our clients or our audiences or whoever, what we're asking them to do is to think differently, okay, or at least to consider that. Now, that seems so easy. I would submit that it's simple, okay, but simple and easy are not the same thing. I was talking about English earlier. I'm also fluent in Finnish, the language of Finland. Okay, people are like, where do they speak Finnish? And I'm like, Finland. That's about it, right?
We live in a pretty good box here in America sometimes, right?
Yeah, I lived in Finland for a couple of years, and it's a very useful language for me to speak. My wife is also fluent in Finnish. We've got a lot of connections to Finland and Finnish culture. And so it's useful for us, but for a lot of people, it's not. Speaking Finnish is simple. It's not easy. The simple part is you learn the words, the vocabulary, you learn the grammar, you learn the sentence structure, you learn how everything's stitched together. Simple, right? Yeah, simple, but not easy. Like playing the guitar, playing the piano. Okay, there are very elaborate skill sets that are involved. It's a very simple process, but it's not easy. So when you want to think differently, there are two things that are required. First, choice. All right. Now, I'm illuminating the obvious because if you don't choose it, you're not going to learn it. Use Finnish as an example. Most people don't choose to speak Finnish, okay? And they never learn it. If you want to, you can, and you have to choose it first. And then the second part is obvious. You got to put in the reps. That's what I love about podcasts like this one. Because what are you going to do? Subscribe, for Pete's sake. Okay, listen regularly, because there's going to be some repetition that's required to reprogram your brain. And at first, it doesn't seem normal or natural. All right. What seems normal is your programming. That's just because you're used to it. Don't be deceived into thinking that what you already think is actually true. It's just what you've been programmed with. Okay. Now that rubs some people the wrong way because they're like, well, but I'm right. Yeah. I interviewed on my show, you guys, I interviewed Dr. Richard Nisbett, and he wrote a book called Thinking. On the front of that book is an endorsement from Malcolm Gladwell. Okay. I mean, this is the level that this guy's playing at. Dr. Nisbett has made his entire career off of studying the mind, reason, the thought processes. That's his area of expertise. And he told me the number one error we make as human beings is that we believe what we think. He called it an error. It doesn't mean we're right. It just means we know we're right. And that gets us into trouble.
Yeah, or keeps us from acting, right?
Yeah. So I guess, Cory, going back to your questions, your second question, how do we do it? Well, we're going to put in some work. Okay. You got to choose to think differently. And then you got to put in some work, hire a coach, listen to the podcast, sign up for the course. I've spent more on my own coaching in this past year than any of my clients have paid me. And that's important because I got to take care of my mental hygiene. I got to do the checkup from the neck up. I'm a professional psychologist and I need coaches. Okay. Let's just be real about that. Now going back to the first question, now I'm trying to remember exactly how you phrased it. Cory.
Yeah, it was just how, when or how do you see people have that paradigm shift? At some point,
yeah,
there's this decision of, I want to see the world different, or someone kicks you in the butt like you were and makes you see the world different. Where do you see that paradigm shift come from, and how can people, try to do that?
Yeah. Thank you. All right, you guys, there's some bad news. So brace yourselves. All right. Pain is inevitable. All right. I love the way Tim Hansel put this. He said, pain is inevitable. Misery is optional, because pain is going to happen. In my book, I go through this whole creation process, and then the starting point for every creation, and we're talking about change, whether it's positive or negative, the starting point is discontent or pain or problem, okay, which we think sometimes is bad. But really, it's simply the impetus for the change. And without that, it doesn't happen. This kind of sucks when it comes to parenting, because guess what your kids have to experience before they're going to learn it.
Yeah, and you've got to watch it.
Which is the hardest thing to do on my YouTube channel. I just beat this almost like a dead horse. Okay, what's your job as a parent? Your job is to love them no matter what, and even if. And we get distracted as parents thinking that our job is to make sure that they, whatever. And it can seem so, noble and lofty. It's to make sure that they're safe and make sure that they're happy and make sure that they get their homework done and make sure that they do their chores and make sure that they are good, productive citizens. Make sure that they.
Yeah.
And that is the biggest problem we run into as parents. Our job is to love them. But Kirk, like you said, if we do our job well, we're going to experience pain. It's the hardest thing on the planet to watch someone you love experiencing pain. And so we try to protect and shield them from that. And in the process, we violate all kinds of principles that actually allow us to lead them or provide opportunities for them to learn the important principles that we also learn through our own pain.
Yeah,
that's the bad news.
Yeah, we've talked about this on the podcast a lot before, that a lot of us are programmed that way to love our kids when they do things that are good. And we see a version of ourselves or a reflection of our parenting in their performance or in their grades or in their sports accomplishments. And it's easy to love them when those things line up with our expectations. The challenge as parents is when those don't line up and we see our children and we not meeting those expectations, and we still have to love them. And I think what you're talking about is just being aware of the choice, right? This has helped me as we've talked about it. We just have to be aware of the choice that, guess what? I still get to love my kid no matter what he does. I still love my daughter no matter what she does or what kind of grades she gets, because she's my daughter. And my love for her is unconditional, meaning there are no conditions that I will not love you. And I think that for me, that's been an important thing. As we've recorded the podcast, we've had people on that have talked about that happening in their own life. And then it's made me think about it, which is your step number one, right? You have to realize that it's a choice. And then it becomes obvious that, of course, I wouldn't love my kid any less if they didn't meet my expectations. But in the programming that we have, we often just get lost in the weeds and we're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe my kid did this. I need to pay for an hour with you.
Well, we got lots more than an hour, Kirk.
There are lots of things that I want to ask you, but I kind of want to get into some of the things that we ask a lot of our guests on the podcast about themselves. I really could go down that hole with you about, all the things that you teach parents. And I think we can still get into some of that, but I kind of want to get to know you and some of the things that made you who you are. Who are some of the people in your life that taught you life's most valuable lessons, and how did they teach them to you?
Well, obviously, the first people that come to my mind are those people who programmed me. And we always blame parents. In fact, one of my colleagues is working on a new book, and the title of his book is Nature or Nurture. Either way, it's your parents' fault. And we can chuckle about that a little bit, but parents take the heat for a lot of things that really it's the parents who have trained and taught and educated us with all of the good things as well. Okay. So it's easy to identify the stuff we don't appreciate, or, oh my gosh, my anger is out of control and it's just like my dad, or whatever it is, right? I mean, you hear these things all the time. My parents programmed me and they did an excellent job. Your parents programmed you and they did an excellent job. You are programming your kids and you've done an excellent job. And you're not done yet. Okay. I love the way Maya Angelou put this. She said, do the best you know how to do. when you know better, do better. And my experience is that's what parents do. We have a little over 1/3 subscribers right now on our YouTube channel, most of them parents. And the biggest lament that I hear is, I'm not a good enough parent. Yes, you are. Yes, you are. The fact that you're even listening to this podcast tells me a whole lot about you as a parent. The Gentleman Project. I mean, you just think about how we're striving to know better so we can do better. But one of the traps we run into is we judge ourselves. We judge ourselves as having not done a good enough job. And then we live out of shame and regret instead of putting ourselves in a position where we can see, okay, it's good. It's good. Now, could it be better? In my model, I teach this. This is the basic model that I teach parents, for starters, okay, where our brain is doing two processes. I know we're not going to get into this on the podcast today, but I'm also here. Let's just do this. I'm going to give everybody who wants it, who's listening, a free copy of my mini book, Portable Positivity, where I describe this model. Because I think this is the operating instructions for the equipment that you're using. And parenting is the #1 personal development program on the planet. Okay. Personal development. You think you're doing it to, make better kids. No, the ultimate outcome of positive parenting is the parent. And what other personal development program has auto enrollment? And you can't opt out.
Auto renew,
and you get multiple opportunities to practice. So I'm just going to jot this down, you guys, if you're listening, or if you can just go to drpauljenkins.com, drpauljenkins.com. Let's do /GP, which stands for Gentleman Project. Okay, can you remember that? And I'll just give you a free copy of that book. And then you can.
Thank you.
From there, you'll see what I'm talking about. It starts here. It starts with me. So going back, Cory, you were asking earlier, how can you introduce this and get it to other people? Get it inside yourself first. Because as you live it and as you apply it, that is the most powerful way to teach it and inspire others. In fact, there's a little bit of a paradox here. It's kind of like when my son was buying his first car. He was 21 years old. He had just come home from a volunteer church mission where he didn't have any work experience. He didn't have any credit. He didn't qualify for a loan. So I took him down to Mountain America Credit Union, where we've been banking since I was his age. And we're signing up for a loan, right? Well, she enters his information in her computer and she gets this dark look on her face as she says, "I'm sorry, you don't qualify for this loan." Well, big surprise. He's a ghost in the credit system. So I throw my hat in the ring. I'm like, how about if I co-sign? Okay, so she starts entering my information, all excited. She gets an even darker look. Do you remember the aforementioned bankruptcy? Yeah, she's like, "Sir, that makes it worse." I knew. I didn't qualify either. That's one of the reasons I wanted to co-sign, so I could build my credit as well, right? So I give her the third option. I reach into my jacket. I pull out $3,000. That's the amount we were looking for to buy a little used car for him. Put it on the table, slide it over to her. How about if I give you the money and you lend it to my son and let me co-sign on it? How's that sound? And she's like, "Oh yeah, we'll give you good rates on that." Yeah, thanks for the good rates on my own money. Right? But here's what I learned. You can get the loan as soon as you prove you don't need the money. And you're both nodding. You're like, "Oh yeah, that's kind of how the banks work." This is how parenting works. This is how relationships work. This is how upgrading your own experience works. You can have the upgrade. It is totally available, and I can show you how to get there as soon as you realize and internalize that you don't need it. It's already good. So what is the practical application of that? You look at your kids or your marriage or your key relationships at any level. There's 7 of them that I teach in my coaching. You look at your key relationships and get yourself into a place where it doesn't have to change. It's already awesome. So you think of your kids, how they doing? And notice that you've got some answers to that, okay? But if you are constantly focusing on what they could do better, how are they feeling?
Inadequate.
Yes. And I don't have to tell you how many hundreds and thousands of kids I've interacted with over 30 years of clinical experience who feel that they could never be good enough for their parents. Why? Because their parents are focused in the model that you'll see in the mini book. In the model, parents are focused on creation and they want to go make things better than they already are, which seems so positive to them. But as they're focusing on how things could be better, kids are wondering, they're in evaluation mode and they're wondering, how am I doing? And that same focus has them feeling like they can never be good enough. We have to help our kids see that they are already awesome, exactly as they are, without changing a thing. Now, does that mean that we're not going to work on improving? No, of course we're going to work on improving. What if I gave you a choice? Look, we have to create something, okay? We have to create something. Now, would you like something better or something worse than what you've already got? Which one do you want? Duh.
Yeah, you'd always say better, right?
Of course. And that's what your kids want too. They already want something better, but they don't need us harping on them about how they need to be better. They're already good. So can I give you a brain hack? That's just a really practical one.
Sure.
Gratitude. Okay, gratitude. There's all kinds of psychological studies. I can show you all the precedents around this, but it's powerful. I call it the gratitude power up. Just remember these 2 numbers, 5 and 25. Okay, 25-5 is what I call this, the gratitude power up. 5 stands for 5 days. Just do the reps for 5 days. Okay, 25 stands for the number of gratitude items that you're going to record. It's going to be on your phone, or you can write it down on a tablet or wherever, okay? And you've done gratitude lists before, right? Well, here's the power up part. At least half of your list of 25 things that you create every day is about the stuff that you are currently challenged with, okay? Something that is hard, difficult, painful, frustrating, kicking your butt. And you come up with at least half of your list every day about that. So let's say you have one of your kids that's doing something that's driving you nuts. Perfect. Okay, pick that. Or you got a little issue going on with your spouse that has you tipped over a little. Remember, creation starts with discontent or pain. So pick that and find what you're grateful for from or because of that, the way it is right now without changing anything. Okay.
I like that.
It could be as simple as a parent I was working with not too long ago. This mom was complaining about her teenage son sneaking out at night. Okay, now what could she be grateful for about that? And just to bring her attention to it, I said, what? You have a teenage son?
Who has friends?
Wait, his legs work? Okay, because not all teenage sons' legs work. But do you see how we get outside of our current thinking? We have to find in and from what it is, the way it is right now. What am I grateful for? And don't make it up. Okay, this is powerful. You do this for 5 days, game changer. It's powerful. I have seen this save lives, literally.
This is great. We had this reminds me of Kevin Clayson's Flip the Gratitude Switch. Do you know Kevin?
I love Kevin.
Kevin's been on our podcast before, and I love that book. I gave it to my kids and had them read it.
You have to listen fast when you're listening to Kevin.
Kevin is a good, fast talker. He's the
he gets going. Love it. Yeah.
So, no, I love that, though, making the gratitude list and making a requirement be some of those things on there that are your challenges at that point. That's pretty powerful because it forces you to look at the things like why, Kevin talks about, I stubbed my toe.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're right.
Well, let me just throw some psychological backing as if Kevin needs it, but behind what Kevin's saying. In fact, he shared this idea with me. He said, if you go to the gym every day, you're going to get stronger, right? And then he said, but what if you go to the gym and you reach down and you pick up that marker that's on the front desk and you do 5 reps with your right and 5 reps with your left, and then you put it down and leave? How much stronger are you going to get if you're only doing the light lifting? You got to get in and pick up some weight, okay? Create some resistance there. And what you're asking your brain to do when you do a gratitude list, most people make the mistake of picking the easy stuff. Health and family and puppies and rainbows and indoor plumbing, okay? That's doing reps with a pencil, okay? Pick up some weight here. You're asking your brain to do something different with what it is. And in the model, you'll see I put what it is right in the middle of that visual model. It is what it is, okay? Whatever your kid's doing, whatever's going on with your spouse, wherever you are in your finances. I was in a bankruptcy. I had to start there. What am I grateful for in this, from this, because of this? Right now, the way it is without changing anything. You get yourself in that space because that creates that. See, you're asking your brain to handle it differently than you have in the past.
Yeah.
Because we're not done yet. We're going to move on to create what is to be. That doesn't exist yet. We haven't created it yet. So we do the heavy lifting and we get ourselves in a good place with what we've been telling ourselves is bad. And it's just some people say, well, that feels like I'm lying to myself. Yeah, you probably are, and don't even realize that you've gotten used to lying to yourself, and it seems right. Pick a different position. Let's see where we can go with it.
That's a great hack. I like that one a lot. I mean, there's a how behind changing the way your brain works, what you just said, right?
Yeah.
I like this idea of we need our kids and ourselves to have pain because that's how we grow. You could use a different word if you wanted, but I like that word. In order to grow, every one of us can look in the mirror and say, when did I grow the most? When we were doing hard things, right?
Yeah.
So I think what you're saying is we need to almost let our kids have that pain, let them do hard things, foster them being able to do those things, but give them the tools to deal with the pain, not get rid of the pain, but give them some true north principles and let them think about the world in the right way so that when the pain comes, they can deal with it and grow, not get their butt kicked. Right? Is that kind of what I'm hearing?
Well, and it's interesting. I heard you use the word that I've heard from so many parents. Let them.
Yeah,
as if like it's up
we have
to
a
you.
Choice. Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
I mean, we try to make sure that they don't experience pain, which, by the way, is impossible and probably evil at some other level. Let them, I mean, they're going to experience pain, right? And part of the parent coaching that I do is helping parents to see that sometimes we go back to the old 3 R's of parenting, rant, rave, and rescue, where we bawl them out and bail them out. Okay, because we don't want them to experience the pain. I use the word discontent intentionally in my book because I think pain is a version of discontent. We don't want our kids to experience that, so we bawl them out and bail them out. What if we just put those consequences in place so that they can learn it now, here, in our home, where they are loved, instead of have the world teach that to them out there where things are going to kick their trash?
But I do think parents can be aware of how they're making life easy for their kids. And let me give you an example of where this comes from for me. My wife grew up in a family there was quite three kids, and mom and dad worked, and she just had to figure out a lot on her own, right? Like the other moms were dropping off their girls at dance and helping them tie their shoe and making sure they were on time and scheduling their day and you name it, right? My wife is probably one of the most self-reliant people I know. It's just because she grew up in an environment. Well, if you wanted to go to dance, you better figure out how to get there. And if you want to put your shoes on, you better figure that out too. And right. So it wasn't right. It was just her environment was a place where she had to become self-reliant really early.
Yeah.
So that made me think more as a parent, right? So when my kids call and say, "Hey, Dad, can you come pick me up from the golf course, which is only a mile away?" No, I'm not going to pick you up because I love you.
Yes.
Walk home. Or you want to get your driver's license? I just went through this with my little girl. I'm like, "You want to get your driver's license? Well, I'll take you driving and I'll help, but you missed your appointment. I don't know what to tell you. I mean, I'm sorry. You need to make a new appointment." My daughter's going to have to wait like a month and a half because she missed some dates. And what we said is, "Hey, here's the dates. Here's the website. Yeah. Here's where you go look and study. Figure it out." And then when she missed a bunch of that, we said, "Well, sorry." And most parents, right now, don't get me wrong, I'm giving you positive examples. We have a lot of negative in our house.
Oh, we all do.
I'm only giving you a couple of positives. I actually have way more negatives than positives. I'm just saying that we do have a choice as parents to foster this idea of you can be self-reliant. You can figure it out on your own. You can do things on your own. And I think we automatically, because we do love our kids, we automatically take away the pain. Or try to. Now, there's certain pain in life you can't take away, but there's also other pain you could give. And that would be from a place of love.
Right. And if it's love that's driving it, it feels different. Yeah. I love those examples, Cory. Thank you.
Dr. Paul, thank you. Thank you for spending some time with us today. I am going to delve into the book. I hope people will go over to drpauljenkins.com/GP and get their copy of the free book. Look and see what else Dr. Paul is doing. Subscribe to his podcast and his YouTube channel. He's got great content over there. If you like our podcast, you'll like his podcast, and you'll get some more synergy and get some of those reps in, that we're talking about. And if you're here, that means you're already made the choice that you want to be a better parent. So let's do that. Let's put a bow on this because I know Dr. Paul is a busy man. We're going to ask him the question that we ask everybody at the end of the Gentleman Project podcast, what they think it means to be a gentleman.
That is such a fun question because we throw that word around all the time, maybe sometimes without stopping to think about what it means. And when I break it down into gentle man, it suggests to me that I exist with peace and joy and love in my heart. And then that manifests to all of the interactions that I have in my key relationships And one of my clients called it unflappable. That there can be storms out there, but the peace and the joy and the love in my heart is what comes out and manifests to other people. I think that's what it means to be a gentleman and what I'm striving to become. That's why I'm glad that I get help from guys like you.
Thank you, Dr. Paul. Well, thank you for joining us today on the Gentleman Project podcast. Please like and subscribe to the podcast. If you like this, if you felt prompted to share this message with somebody during the podcast, please act on that good thought and make it a great week. I'm Kirk Chugg.
And I'm Cory Moore. Thanks, everyone.